The privilege of oppression. If you are a person that has any sort of critical thinking abilities, you are well aware that privileges are all circumstantial. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, being oppressed becomes somebody's entire identity, so they can't see that. They like to think that if they are not privileged in most instances in life based on a certain trait, that they can never be privileged by it. When I was young, I was always wary of people who became professional gay people, as I used to put it, who based their entire life around LGBTQ activism and stuff. Not just because it was weird, but because they always seemed like deeply sad people. They based their life around their lack of privilege, and it seemed like they could never get out of that mindset, even though a lot of the time they made a career out of that supposed oppression. So that oppression became a circumstantial privilege later in life in a certain way. Similarly, while it is definitely a privilege to be a white American in many or most instances in the United States, this is not always the case. Nobody ever mentions things like Asian privilege, and I'm not suggesting that they should, but Asian people earn more on average than white people in the US, and also aren't going to be targeted by anti white violence in a riot like the one that just happened in Milwaukee. Does that mean we should talk more about Asian privilege as if they are bad people for having Asian privilege? Absolutely not. It means we should have better, more nuanced discussions about race relations and racism instead of the same tired white privilege 101 nonsense. This goes for all supposed privileges. There are some instances where it is an advantage to be a man, definitely, but many where it is not. For example, women fear for their safety walking home at night. Often they fear more than men do. But is this deserved? Well, women might be more likely to get mugged and have their purse ripped from them by a crackhead who will run away if they're walking home alone, or they could be raped at knife point on the street. These things that the rape happens pretty rarely, and the majority of violent crimes actually happen to men. And if you're a dude, you can be walking around and get attacked by a gang of 4 or 5 guys that go out to mug people. They usually tend to beat up men. It's not like they're doing this to women, usually. So there's statistics to back that up. Google them. Furthermore, I can concede that being gay gives me occasional privileges, even though it is usually a disadvantage in society. For example, I recently had to look after a friend of mine who was blackout drunk, and I was able to stay with her in the girls' bathroom because I informed the other girls that I'm gay. Also, I can have conversations with feminists about things like the faulty campus rape statistic, and I see them tensing up as if I'm a rape denier, but when I tell them that I'm gay, they take my position a lot differently. I could come up with a few more gay privileges, probably. Because of the fact that so many people forget that privileges are circumstantial, many people never think about the various privileges they acquire over time. You could be disadvantaged overall by greater society for being gay, for example, but then privileged within the gay community or queer scene, as opposed to how a straight guy would be treated. Though it should be of note that gay men are often treated as the enemy within queer spaces, because of the myth that gay men are even more misogynistic than straight men, which is spread by fourth wave feminists. Within these queer scenes, which have become increasingly dominated by fourth wave intersectional feminists and what people describe as social justice warrior types, people make a very deliberate effort to not just honor and respect historically marginalized groups such as people of color and trans people, but even go out of their way to place them on a pedestal. Therefore, within these queer scenes, a lot of these people end up being super privileged within that context. Feminists have always been the first to privilege historically marginalized groups, in my memory, in this way, but only so long as it fits their political agenda. They'll throw you under the bus if you stop falling in line with the feminist establishment's goals, which is why fourth wave feminists have turned on gay men in recent years. If you don't know about that, watch some of my other videos because I get into it. An example of feminists privileging one of these people happened when I was once hanging out with a group of lesbians and a trans guy. We had a brief awkward moment where we all told jokes that we had made up. Of course, every lesbian feminist delivered a completely unfunny pun. So I told a yo mama joke that I had made up in middle school. Yo mama had so many kids, she gave them all the same name. Welfare. Of course, one of the lesbian feminists practically yelled at me about how the joke wasn't funny to people who were on welfare like herself. But when the trans guy said that he was on welfare growing up and he thought the joke was funny, she had to be quiet because his trans guy opinion was more important than hers. At least to her, because she worships people she considers more oppressed than herself. That all said, a lot of these people end up abusing these privileges. Likely because they've never had to face the reality that they can be bullies, because growing up, they always felt like they were constantly victims. Some of them end up behaving really badly, and nobody will call them on their bullshit. Except maybe somebody like myself, and man, has it opened me up to some horrible attacks. All you have to do as a gay male is to point out that a trans person of color, for example, is being really hateful and mean, and often their true colors will come out. Let's say you object to them trying to post photos on their Facebook timeline of some guy that allegedly said something slightly transphobic at a club, and they're even going so far as to release his work information and ask people to get him fired or come by and harass him or something. God forbid a gay guy try to say that this behavior is bullying and taking things a step too far, and also making this person look bad who's doing this. They'll say that you are tone policing them, which is just code word for you aren't allowed to object to me being an asshole because reasons. Then they'll say that they don't appreciate you instilling respectability politics into the conversation, as if being respectable is such an inherently awful thing. And usually they'll start attacking your character. If you're a white gay guy, they'll attack your race, your gender. They'll say you must be transphobic and misogynistic too because you are defending the guy, even though you weren't even defending the guy. This behavior is known as crybullying. And the worst part is that people generally cater to their bullshit, at least certainly queer people and fourth wave intersectional feminist types. Either they hate white men too, and they just don't care when one gets attacked unfairly for their identity, even if they are gay, or they are just afraid of objecting to it themselves because they have seen what happens when somebody stands up to the crybullying. They let the bullies win. But the bullies will get theirs in the end because these people live for this type of drama, and they'll feed on each other like starving piranhas eventually once all the light dudes are gone. These privileged, oppressed people usually constantly post stupid BuzzFeed and everyday feminism articles backing up their own confirmation bias bullshit that encourages themselves and others to feel that they are oppressed, even though now, in many cases in queer reality, the people who have the most supposed oppression are super privileged by this queer reality. A black trans woman, for example, can get a DJ gig basically without a promoter even listening to a mix of hers, especially if she's pretty, just because people are so eager for black trans female DJs at queer nights at the moment. Their perceived oppression gives them a huge advantage, and I think subconsciously they kind of know that, which is why they keep sharing the blog articles to back up this worldview. If anybody challenges this narrative, they will be demonized and bullied. These people often get really greedy. They want to hold on to their new privilege, so they begin denying that others might experience hardships as well. When you present them with the data that gay cis men are the majority of total hate crimes based on gender or sexuality at all in the US, they freak out and act as if you are denying how often trans women, especially trans women of color, are victimized, when you are just pointing out some statistics that don't necessarily contradict anything. Two things can be true at once, but these people have, they value narrative over fact. These people will often hold spaces hostage if they can, demanding people conform to their own self-pity and hypersensitive feelings. Sensitivities that I often don't even really think truly deeply exist, but are just a tool that these people use to manipulate their social groups into catering to their demands all the time. I say one of the first steps to a healthier queer community is to stop letting them. Nobody is above having to treat people with common respect. Not even a black trans lesbian in a wheelchair who's missing an eye. That's my read. What do you think? Leave it in the comments.